to begin talking about the circulatory system. Now this presentation is going to be rather long, so I'm going to try to keep the illustrations and examples to a minimum so we can discuss those more in class. The circulatory system is made of three primary parts. We have the heart, we have blood vessels, and we have blood. And we're going to talk about each of these individually. The heart has four chambers. It has the right ventricle, the left ventricle, the right atrium, and the left atrium. And you can see those in the diagram over here. You're going to have to be able to tell the difference between the atria and the ventricles. So the atria are the two upper chambers, and they're smaller than the ventricles. And the septum is what divides the left and right sides of the heart. So here's the septum. Okay, one way that you can remember this is that ventricles with the septum kind of form the letter V. Okay, or you can think of it alphabetically. Atria are at the top and ventricles are at the bottom. The right side of the heart has very little oxygen, and the left side of the heart has lots of oxygen. The heartbeat is controlled by the pacemaker, and the pacemaker is just a group of cells that is found in the right atrium, and they're going to have some electrical chemical impulses that are going to make sure that the heart keeps beating. So we'll talk about the pacemaker that you're born with, and in class we'll also talk about artificial pacemakers that sometimes people have to use later. We're going to talk about four major blood vessels: the pulmonary artery, the pulmonary vein, the aorta, and the vena cava. So the pulmonary artery goes from the right ventricle to the lungs, and the pulmonary vein brings blood from the lungs to the left atrium, so back to the heart. The aorta takes blood from the left ventricle and carries it to the entire body, where the vena cava will bring the blood from the body back to the heart, to the right atrium. Your heartbeat is just a contraction of valves, and we're going to look at that a little more closely in a couple minutes. So basically the circulatory system is like a transport system that operates through diffusion and osmosis. And we talked about this in the chemistry unit, but in case you don't remember, diffusion is the movement of materials from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. And osmosis is just a special kind of diffusion that's the movement of water from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. In your body, there are lots of permeable structures that allow for diffusion and osmosis to occur. We have capillaries, body cells, air sacs, and villi. And we'll look at this diagram a lot more closely in class and talk about how osmosis and diffusion can occur through these permeable structures. We have different levels of blood vessels. So for example, when the blood leaves the heart, it goes to arteries, and then to smaller arteries called arterioles, and then it goes to capillary beds. Capillary beds are where diffusion and osmosis take place, and where cells get the nutrients and oxygen they need while getting rid of the waste that they don't need. On the way back to the heart, blood then is going to go through venules, and then veins, and then back to the heart. And this is just a diagram of how that all works: artery, arteriole, capillary bed, venule, and vein. The pathway of blood is a little bit tricky, and you will have to know this for the test, so make sure that you get this written down. If we start in the right atrium, then we go to the right ventricle, the pulmonary artery that takes the blood to the lungs, then the pulmonary vein, which brings it back from the lungs to the left atrium, then the left ventricle, from the aorta then to all the body cells, comes back through the vena cava and back to the right atrium of the heart. I have a fun song that we'll practice to help us learn this. Let's talk about the components of blood then. Blood is made up of red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. We have different types of circulation that go through the body. We have pulmonary circulation that goes from the heart to the lungs and then back to the heart. We have systemic circulation, which goes from the heart to all the body parts, the whole system, so systemic, and then back to the heart. Renal circulation goes from the arteries and veins from main vessels to and from the kidneys. Portal circulation helps to circulate nutrients from the small intestine. And coronary circulation is the circulation of blood through the arteries, veins, and capillaries right there within the heart. Those are some of the types of circulation, though those are the ones that we'll be talking about. So back to the components of blood. We have red blood cells, which carry oxygen and carbon dioxide. They have a protein in them called hemoglobin. These red blood cells are made in bone marrow, and there are about 5 million of them in one drop of blood. So you have lots and lots of red blood cells. White blood cells help to protect the body against disease. So they're going to destroy invaders in the bloodstream. You have about 6,000 of them in a drop of blood. They're also made in the bone marrow, and they can live for months or even years. So these are the defenders. We also have platelets that help to form blood clots. These are also created in the bone marrow. You have about 300,000 of them in a drop of blood. So these are what are responsible for helping to make scabs. And then the plasma is the liquid part of the blood. And the primary ingredient in plasma is water. And you can see a little chart over here. And plasma is made up of nutrients, wastes, and proteins along with water. Here's a list of the blood types. You don't have to write them all down, but you should be familiar with the most common blood type and the least common blood type. RH factor is something that we're going to talk about in class. So go ahead and write down that a plus means that it has the RH factor and a minus means it doesn't have the RH factor. So 85% of you have an RH factor and 15% of you do not. But in class we're going to talk about what exactly that RH factor means. But it's a little confusing, so we'll wait until we're in class together to talk about it. Just reviewing, going back to our blood vessels and how things travel. The pulmonary artery goes from the right ventricle to the lungs. The pulmonary vein from the lungs to the left atrium. So you should be able to associate pulmonary with lungs, if that helps you remember things. The aorta, which by the way is the largest blood vessel, goes from the left ventricle to the entire body. And the vena cava, remember, brings the blood back from the body to the right atrium of the heart. Arteries take blood away from the heart. So one way to remember this is AA, artery away. And they're made of 3 different layers of muscle, and they're stretchy because they're going to have to be able to contract. Veins take blood back to the heart, so they're bringing the blood back. There are 4 main valves. 2 are atrioventricular valves. Atrioventricular just means that they are the valves between the atria and the ventricles. The pulmonary valve is located at the pulmonary artery, and the aortic valve is located at the aorta. Your heartbeat actually has 2 parts that makes for the thump-thump. Okay? The first part is when the upper part of the heart contracts, pushing blood from the atria to the ventricles through that atrioventricular valve. The second part is when the bottom of the heart contracts and it pushes the blood out of the ventricles and into the body. You have in your heart, and all hearts, have some cord-like structures, and we'll see this when we do the dissection. They're called chordae tendineae, and they prevent the blood from going back into the atria, so they help keep the blood going in the right direction. That's all we have for now. Make sure that you write down any questions that you have and write a brief summary. We'll talk about this in class.